let's stay with that and with this subject. And I want to address the Mike Evans angle that you brought up. So in a protest of Donald Trump being elected president, Bucs wide receiver Mike Evans chose to sit for the national anthem on Sunday. On Tuesday, he had a change of heart, telling our Josina Anderson this. I want to start by apologizing to all the U.S. military members, their families, and the fans who I offended by my actions on Sunday. It was never my intention, as I have tremendous respect for the men and women who serve our country. I have very strong emotions regarding some of the many issues that exist in our society today. I chose to sit as an expression of my frustration towards this year's election. It was very personal for me, as it was for so many Americans. With that being said, I will not sit again during the national anthem because I want to focus my efforts on finding more effective ways to communicate my message and bring about change by supporting organizations and movements that fight for equal rights for minorities. Evans indicated on Instagram that, like Colin Kaepernick, he didn't vote. So, Stephen A., you are very hard on Colin Kaepernick for the same thing. Does Evans look better or worse right now?
Well, I think he looks better, but he doesn't look good. He doesn't look as bad as Colin Kaepernick because he didn't instigate a national dialogue and cause a national divide by the position that he took. He reacted to a result he didn't like, and whether we agree or disagree with it, in the end, it just wasn't consistent with what he's saying his position is, because he's saying we can't stand for this, we need to change, but you did nothing to facilitate that change. In the case of Colin Kaepernick, I believe it was the Sacramento Bee, correct me if I'm not sure I'm accurate about this, but I believe it was the Sacramento Bee who revealed that even before the protest, Colin Kaepernick hadn't even registered to vote. You didn't register to vote. You take a position where you kneel for the national anthem. You want to bring attention to it. You're talking about you won't change until there's change, but you did nothing to facilitate change when it really, really counts. There is nothing, absolutely positively nothing. Our historians, particularly individuals within the African-American community, will be the first to tell you there is no instrument that we have available to us to provoke change more powerful than to vote. When you combine that with the fact that you've got guys like James Carney and Goodwin and Schwerber, individuals from the civil rights era in 1964 in Mississippi, they made the movie Mississippi Burning out of it. These three individuals were abducted and murdered. Took 44 days to find their bodies while they were trying to get African Americans to register to vote in the South. You know something about your history. That's right. You know something about your history, and you turn around and you ignore all of that, and you slap historians in the face like that by not electing to vote and then going to announce to the world that you don't vote. That is shameful. It's unforgivable.
But Mike Evans
did not do that.
No, but Mike Evans looks worse than Kaepernick.
Okay, how?
Because Kaepernick's position to me seems naive. The idea that there's an equivalency between candidates and it wouldn't have an effect on black or brown lives that he claims matter is, to me, naive and misinformed, maybe is a better way to say it. But Mike Evans looks worse here because at least Kaepernick was consistent. Even as pressure came, he stuck to his guns. Now, he eventually went from sitting to kneeling after discussion, with a member of the armed services who wanted to appeal to his sense of patriotism, if not nationalism. Hey, people are going to misinterpret this as you're saying something against the military. Kaepernick said, okay, let's come to a compromise where my conscience is okay, but I'm not offending people as much. I don't see that as the same kind of backing down as Mike Evans here. Let's look at this. Mike Evans didn't vote. He is a public figure in a swing state. In fact, more than anything, that swung the election, Florida. Now, he votes in Texas, a red state, but he's a public figure in a swing state who doesn't vote and now makes it public that he didn't vote.
Afterward.
Yeah, afterward, that's true. Still, it's apathetic. He stands up for his principles at first, not in a general way. He's protesting Trump specifically.
Right.
And the message there is, I'm not going to allow this kind of behavior that we saw in the election and the kind of things that Trump said be normalized in American life because a lot of people voted for him. I'm going to stand up to that. Well, good for you. That's standing up for you. Oh, wait, there's a little bit of pressure. There's a little bit of backlash. Okay, I'll sit back down again. That looks doubly bad because he doesn't vote. Public figure in a swing state, votes in a red state, so, maybe it remains red because people like him who feel that way aren't voting, and then backs down as soon as there's a little pressure.
He backed down. It wasn't that he backed down, in my opinion, because of the pressure. He backed down because he realized how hypocritical his position looked because he hadn't voted and he was doing more harm than good to the very cause he was addressing. That's realizing the error of your ways and standing down. In the case of, and not only that, especially when your protest is of a specific individual and the rhetoric that he was spewing, that's entirely different. In the case of Colin Kaepernick, you essentially indicted a nation. You talked about the United States of America. You had a problem with what this country stands for, what it is about. You questioned whether or not it was living up to the values it spews, and then turned around and confessed that even though you felt that way and took that position, in the same place, you took no stance when it comes to activating and exercising your inalienable right to create the change you said you wanted. That is much worse than Michael Evans. That is much worse than Mike Evans.
There was a teaching moment here that Mike Evans could have participated in had he said, instead of backing down because he appeared hypocritical, I made a mistake. I didn't vote. I disenfranchised myself in a sense already.
He did that with his actions.
I will not make that mistake again. And now what I can do is at least stand up and protest.
And I'm telling you, he did that with his actions. What the hell has Colin Kaepernick done? He sat up there, took a position.
No, he looks like he caved now, Mike Evans.
You might say he looked like he caved, but the point is he stood down because he recognized he made a mistake. The bottom line is Colin Kaepernick saw absolutely nothing wrong with not voting. Absolutely nothing wrong without provoking the change that you asked other people to join you in trying to create. There's nothing more worse or more hypocritical than that. Colin Kaepernick should be ashamed of himself.
Mike Evans had
ashamed of himself
to make an optimal choice, and he made a way suboptimal choice.
Mike Evans just realized he stood down because he realized he made a mistake. Colin Kaepernick is the flaming hypocrite. Flaming hypocrite.
The bottom line to the bottom line is your vote matters, and I hope that our country realizes this in hindsight of the election and does that moving forward. I know I sound like a Monday morning quarterback, but that's the truth. League sources are telling ESPN that the Bucks, Grizzlies, and Mavs have moved away from Donald Trump-branded hotels in New York City and Chicago in an effort in part to avoid an implied association with the president-elect. Sources say another Eastern Conference team contracted to stay at the Trump Soho in New York this season has likewise already decided to switch to a different property in Manhattan when its current contract expires at season's end. While 7 other teams told ESPN that they still are scheduled to stay at Trump-branded properties this season. Stephen A?
I'm not surprised. Milwaukee Bucks, Jason Kidd is your coach. Memphis Grizzlies, they got my man Fizdale, who's the new coach, assistant in Miami, from a former assistant in Miami. Great, great guy. Rooting for him, think he's going to do an outstanding job as a coach. And, of course, the Dallas Mavericks are owned by Mark Cuban. And one of the most conscientious human beings that I've come to know over the years is a guy by the name of Rick Carlisle. Very tight with Tony Robbins, by the way. Not surprised at it at all. But let me say this, and I'll be the first to admit that this may be somewhat controversial and all of this other stuff, but I'm just going to say it.
Okay.
Doesn't mean much to me. The fact of the matter is that Donald Trump ran for election for 18 months. There was nothing that he said in the last week before he won the presidency, you understand, that alarmed you, that didn't alarm you or shouldn't have alarmed you the 15 to 16 months prior. You understand? Where was all the activity then? Where was all the uproar then? And that's something that I think is incredibly important. Now, I'm not going to get on the air and denigrate our president-elect. He's our president. That's what it is. It is what it is. Everybody else can do that. That's fine. What I pay attention to is what we're doing as a community. I've spoken about Colin Kaepernick and how hypocritical and now useless I think he is because after all of that noise he made, he didn't vote. Mike Evans, who I like, plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It would have been nice had he voted, considering the protest that he wanted to make after Trump was elected. But you didn't activate yourself in the election as our president.
We'll get into that more a little bit later.
We'll get into that a little bit later. So that definitely is true as well. But I bring all of that up because it's important to point out 43% of eligible voters elected not to vote. About 2 million less African Americans voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Barack Obama, which means that Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin may have been won had they activated themselves in that election. Immigrants, both legal and illegal, have been raving and roaring about Donald Trump, okay? But he got 29% of the vote. So I'm sitting here, I'm going like this, something's wrong here. And when I see the noise that people are making right now, it's typical to me. Too little, too late. There are a lot of things that, now maybe the NBA season wasn't going on at that time, but it was going on last year when some of that rhetoric was going on. It was going on last year. They played, didn't say a word. Didn't say a word. Dismissed it, didn't take.
Well, I mean, part of that is you said last week that the media seemed to be pro-Hillary and anti-Donald Trump. But in fact, in their coverage, they created a false equivalency between one person who was appealing to tribal kind of politics and talking about a ban on Muslims entering the country, a religious test essentially to get into this country. Give us, you're tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses yearning to be breathe free unless they're Muslims. I mean, like, that wasn't covered to the extent that Hillary's trumped-up email scandal was.
I disagree. Go ahead.
Not even close.
I disagree.
Even though, I mean,
Totally
SNL did a skit on it. It was so hilarious, the kind of disproportional coverage. Being helped by a hostile foreign power in Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things were not covered by the media to the extent. So that's one thing, maybe keeping people less than enthused about supporting the other side or fighting against Trump. And another thing was the polls, with the exception of Nate Silver, 538, ESPN's very own Nate Silver, who said, look, there's like a 1 in 3 chance Trump can win this election. All the other polls and everybody else, all the other so-called experts were decrying Nate, were really deriding Nate's polls.
All the pollsters should be fired.
And
all of them were wrong.
Saying he's just trying to drive traffic to his website. Nonsense like this, when he actually, watching that, made me think people need to get politically active, but I think there was a false sense of security that Trump can't really win the election. Well, guess what? He won, and he won on a wave of populist anger. And I think those who say, in the NBA and other places, who say, even if it was just rhetoric, even if it was just Machiavellian, the ends justify the means, and how he governs will be different and be a unifier instead of a divider, though it doesn't tend to happen that way with people who get elected on a wave of populist anger. Even if that's the case, that's not okay with us. You can't use that kind of rhetoric and have us support you or legitimize you in any way. 1. 2, there are others who will say that, no, if he governs differently than the rhetoric, then we will eventually not boycott the hotels, but that remains to be seen.
And I'm saying to you, you're missing the point. I believe you're missing the point because at the end of the day, it was a combination of arrogance in terms of there's no way he's going to win, and disregarding, taking for granted he was going to lose. There's no way like somebody like that would win this election. Somebody spewing that rhetoric, which is something he never spewed prior to running for election, by the way. My point to you is that, to my knowledge, I've been around him a lot of times, a lot of Shaq and other sports figures. We've been around him. We never heard that stuff.
By the way, I've had him on the radio. He was a very good guest years ago.
We never heard it. We never heard that until he ran for election. My point to you is this. At the end of the day, the reason why I take the position that I take is because if people had activated themselves in this election, then we wouldn't be sitting here worried about the stuff. They took for granted he was going to lose, and now they upset that he won when it's their fault that he won because they weren't active. They weren't active in all of this. They did it. They did it.
About that,
all right, then own it. That's all I'm saying.
Speaking of L.A., the Lakers didn't win their 7th game of the season until the turn of the year last season. This season, they've already won 7 games, and we're only midway through November. Progress. The Lakers have now won 6 of their last 8 and are 2 games over 500. Max Kellerman. Is it time to take the Lake Show seriously?
Yes, the baby Lakers are for real. Now, in the NBA, what's been shown in recent years is after, I believe it's 22 games, we know the playoff seeding already. Like, look at the records after 22 games. That's what the playoff seeding is going to be. Right now, they are, 12 games in, 10 games in? And so there's a little time still for the Lakers. Let's see what happens. However, when you look at the standings and who's, right now they're ahead of the Thunder. That should not continue. But you tell me the team that's for sure going to be the 8th seed over the Lakers in the West. The Grizzlies, the Kings, the Nuggets, the T-Wolves, the Suns, the Mavericks, the Pelicans. There's no sure thing in there. Luke Walton has turned Julius Randle from a guy who looked like a bust to boom. He has Nick Young playing defense. Think about that for a second. Nick Young is playing consistent defense. D'Angelo Russell looks terrific much of the time. as does Clarkson. And, I mean, they have and by the way, this is without their #2 draft pick really strong enough yet to assert himself in the NBA. The Lakers' future looks bright, but their present ain't bad either. They could make the playoffs in the West. I can't believe I'm saying this. They could do it this year.
Few things I wanted to point out. Number one, Julius Randle didn't look like a bust. His first year, he never played because he got injured the very first game. Last year, he came back. That was the Kobe era. So this is really, as far as I'm concerned, his first year. He's never looked like a bust. Nick Young, a.k.a. Swaggy P. But when you get yourself dimed out, caught in certain situations, and your heart gets a little broke, you kind of tend to prioritize. So he's not as distracted, per se, this year as he may have been in years past. That's something we have to take into consideration. That may have been facilitating his growth as a player on both ends of the floor. I'll tell you where it will shock you, and it'll stop the presses right here. I alluded to this weeks ago, and I will say it again. First of all, I will be at the Lakers Spurs Friday night. I'll be interested to see that game. It's going to be a big test for them, no doubt about it. I want to sit there, and I promised I was going to lay off Jim Buss. I've been very nice to that man, all right, since this season, because I'm fond of his hiring of Luke Walton. I am a fan of Luke Walton. I think this guy is a golden boy, and I think he's going to prove to be an exceptional coach in this game. I really like Luke Walton, and I love his daddy, so that don't help. Bill Walton, who doesn't love Bill Walton? But here's the deal. He's the best. But here's the deal. Luke Walton does have a 29th ranked defense, who's second to last in field goal percentage allowed, or third worst, rather, second to last in field goal percentage allowed, three-point shooting, rather, allowed, and what have you. We got to pay attention to that. 5 of the next 6 games are going to tell me what I need to know about the Los Angeles Lakers, albeit this early. It's because 82-game schedule. You got the Spurs, you got the Bulls, you got 2 games, you got Oklahoma City, you got 2 games against the Golden State Warriors, who you shellacked by 20. They will remember this. And keep in mind that this is the same Lakers squad that just got blown out by Minnesota and gave up 47 to Andrew Wiggins. So let's not forget that here. We like what we're seeing from the Lakers, but it's essentially a byproduct based off of what we've seen from them the last 2 years, which was horrendous. So because of that, anything they give us that's relatively decent is something we're going to be happy about. That's what we're looking at right now.
You're right. The next half dozen games, we'll see what they're made of. They started the season, I mean, like, they've already beaten the Warriors this year.
That's what I said.
They have some quality wins and some quality losses.
That was the second back-to-back. Remember, the Warriors played the night before.
Still the Warriors.
Oklahoma City. I'm just
still
saying.
The Warriors. They beat the Hawks.
Right.
They beat the Rockets.
That's
8-2 team, 6-4 team.
That's right.
I mean, they have some quality wins. Yeah. Even in their losses, they have usually been competitive and decided in the fourth quarter. The Lakers have come a long way. Now, the T-Wolves on paper look more talented, sure. But I want to talk about Julius Randle for a second. He said he never looked like a bust. I think he did. Not in terms of his skills. You could see he had skills. He could handle the ball for a big-ish guy, etc. But the way he was applying his skills made me wonder, watching him, last year especially, because he was hurt the year before, made me wonder, is he actually going to be a good NBA player, or is he going to be a player who looks good and puts up numbers but doesn't help you win?
Yeah, but
he is a good NBA player.
But I'm saying what you're wondering about, you can't ignore the fact that he was coming off an injury. And because he was coming off that injury, they say it takes a year or so. So he may have been playing the way that he was playing to compensate for whatever he was physically however he physically felt he was lacking because he was coming off that injury. But also keep in mind, we have to wait and see because, again, this schedule that you've got coming up, if Luke Walton, you know, let me tell you what Luke Walton deserved the biggest credit for? Jordan Clarkson and Louis Williams off the bench. Because you got
the second unit's as good as their first unit.
I'm just saying, you got guys coming off the bench with firepower. That, to me, getting Swaggy P in the starting lineup, but getting them coming off the bench is big.
Randle, by the way, just because you can dribble doesn't mean you always should. Now he's taking it off the glass, pushing it, and getting rid of the ball.
I'm a fan of Randle.
Walton has them playing well,
I'm a fan of Randle. Randle can play.
First Take is brought to you by Audi and the $4.99 DQ Chicken Strip Basket at participating locations.
Oh, Phil Jackson, he's never been shy around a microphone, and he had some words that LeBron James found very offensive and inaccurate. The Zen Master characterized James' business associates as a posse in a recent interview with our Jackie McMullen. Here's the quote from Phil. It had to hurt when they lost LeBron. That was definitely a slap in the face, but there were a lot of little things that came out of that. When LeBron was playing with the Heat, they went to Cleveland, and he wanted to spend the night. They don't do overnights. Teams just don't. So now Spoelstra has to text Riley and say, what do I do in this situation? And Pat, who has Iron Fist rules, answers, you are on the plane. You are with this team. You can't hold up the whole team because you and your mom and your posse want to spend an extra night in Cleveland. LeBron, how do you feel about Phil's comments?
To use that label, and if you go and read the definition of what the word posse is, it's not what I've built over my career. It's not what I stand for. It's not what my family stands for. And I believe the only reason he used that word is to see young African Americans trying to make a difference. We see the success that we had, but then there's always someone that lets you know how far we still have to go as African Americans. You know, and I just don't believe that Phil Jackson would have used that same term if he was doing business with someone else. You know, you know, working with another team, or if he was working with anybody in sports that was owning a team that wasn't African American and they had a group of guys around him that he didn't agree with what they did, I don't think he would have called him a posse. I had nothing but respect for him as a coach, for what he was able to do. Obviously, at the helm of one of my favorite player of all time, MJ, and also been there growing up and watching with the Lakers. But I got nothing for him.
You said you had respect for him up until.
Stephen A., talk to me.
First of all, LeBron James is 1,000% correct. He said he had respect for Phil Jackson. Evidently, he's lost it. Phil Jackson deserves a diminished level of respect this morning. Let's be clear. Phil Jackson is not a racist. Let's get that out the way. MJ would attest to that. Kobe Bryant would attest to that. Shaquille O'Neal would attest to that, et cetera, et cetera. He's no bigot. He's as progressive as they come. But Phil Jackson needs to appreciate the fact that at least when the word bigotry comes up, he did come across as a bit that way. Because we saw our president-elect, whether it was at a restaurant or wherever he was, with a bunch of people the other day. They weren't called the posse. I certainly haven't heard Phil Jackson alluding to anybody, any white ball players as having a posse. When Rachel Nichols, he did an exceptional job of highlighting and articulating on Twitter what Phil had written in his book.
Amen.
He alluded to what he thought LeBron was, but he also said, we shall see. Well, what have we seen since Phil wrote that book? We've seen LeBron capture 3 championships. We've seen him go to 3 consecutive NBA finals. We see himself in peak condition. We see him going out there, despite being the richest player in the NBA, playing like he's broke. We see a 31-year-old individual who has rebuilt downtown Cleveland, not once, but twice, whose philanthropy can't be questioned, who's facilitating thousands of kids receiving an education and beyond because of the millions upon millions of dollars he, through his foundation, have poured into those efforts. This man is the quintessential iconic sports role model that we have seen maybe ever. And for Phil Jackson to talk about him and a crew of individuals the way that they do, I take offense to that. Let me be very, very clear. LeBron is another player to me, as great as he is. In terms of personal relationships, I'm tight with many, many other players, more so than I am with LeBron James. But I respect the hell out of him as a man, as a brother, as an athlete, as a superstar. And the profound respect that I have for him is equal to that I have of his boys. I know Rich Paul. I know Maverick Carter. I know his boy Randy. Good brothers who work their tails off, who take offense to this kind of label because they understood the importance at a very, very early period that you can't be about being a hanger-on. LeBron James ain't about that. He wants to give you an opportunity, but it's up to you to kick the door down and to elevate yourself to another level. They have done that in their respective chosen fields. They should be commended for it. And for Phil, Max, to allude to that, to them in that way was highly, highly disrespectful, especially since it's nothing that he's ever said about MJ. It's nothing that he ever said about Kobe. Why on earth would you try to say it about LeBron James? I don't blame LeBron James for being offended.
Neither do I, but I'm going to defend Phil Jackson a little bit here. And I realize when a white dude on TV defends the white coach who says something racially insensitive about the black player, it can easily be perceived as, of course, because, you know, if you didn't live through the struggle, or if you don't live through the struggle, you don't identify with it, and you're going to try to brush it off as not a big deal. I think that these things become big deals partly because it's baked into the system. So LeBron James uses this moment as a teaching moment. I thought it was really well done by LeBron James, because people should be aware that sometimes the language they use, particularly groups that have not been, you know, persecuted groups, and Phil Jackson belongs to one of those groups. They should be aware that the language they use sometimes reflects, even if it's unconscious bias or unconscious feelings that they would be better off without. It does reflect that at times, and LeBron James used the moment to point it out. But we're here, and the sports media is here selling, you know, the products we sell during the commercials. And if we think that an issue can get people to watch, we will exploit that issue. And on Twitter, it'll be clickbait, etc. So a good teaching moment that LeBron is using here with Phil Jackson turns Phil Jackson into a villain out of proportion with the actual crime he committed. What was that crime? Lazy thinking, I think, is really the crime that Phil Jackson committed here. Not just maybe using the word posse to describe a young African-American, especially successful African-Americans in this case, because, you know, in boxing we call it an entourage, and that's generalizing. We know that entourages frequently are filled with hangers-on. You pointed out very well, I think, why that's not the case with LeBron, because LeBron gives his, you know, people an opportunity, but then they have to make the most of it. So the people you see around LeBron have been selected out. It's like an evolutionary process. Either you contribute or you're not there. But how else is it lazy? I want to mention this because it relates to that idea. Maverick Carter in particular, I want to point out, is an extraordinary person. It's what are the odds that someone who played on the same high school basketball team as LeBron would be given the chance and then becomes a mogul in his own right, and then doesn't just take the opportunity and does okay, but does exponentially better than anyone could have imagined. That not only is LeBron a 1 in a billion guy, but he surrounds him, but the guy he played on the same team with is a 1 in a million guy. So it's general and lazy in that from that point of view of Phil to use the word posse, but to apply it to the people around LeBron, particularly Maverick Carter, is in a way it points out how extraordinary Maverick Carter is, because in Phil Jackson's experience, the entourage, or posse as he calls it, around players in a predominantly African-American league has been to entitle those players in a way that he feels is counterproductive. And I think that's legitimate. It's just lazy to apply it to LeBron.
With all due respect, I think you're letting Phil Jackson off the hook. Now, you are as sensitive and as decent as they come. In no way am I questioning you in terms of how heartfelt you feel and how sincere you are, particularly to a myriad of causes that affect the African-American community. I want to say that. But if I'm correct, you are Jewish, right?
Correct.
Max Kellerman, does a black person or a white person get to define what is offensive to you as a Jewish person?
I don't think anyone gets to define what's offensive to anyone else.
No, what I'm saying to you is that as a Jewish person, if somebody says something that you deem anti-Semitic, it's not for me to question that. It's for me to be informed by someone who is Jewish, enlightened,
Sure.
and then as a result, I'm able to say, okay, you would know, I wouldn't, because I'm not Jewish. I'm saying here, LeBron James is the black man. Okay, he is the one that is standing front and center, feeling the words that Phil Jackson said. Now, you got to understand something, Max Kellerman, because it's very, very important here. Black folks in America, let's be very, very clear. On many, many occasions, we feel undervalued, underestimated, marginalized. My man Joe Madison was talking about that this morning on Sirius XM on Urban View. Those are three things that black folks not only feel consistently, but religiously and methodically go about their lives of working against. I am saying to you, Max Kellerman, Phil Jackson, who has 11 championships, riding the coattails of Michael Jordan. Let's call it what it is. Phil Jackson didn't invent the triangle. That was Tex Winter. He riding the coattails of Michael Jordan with Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, riding the coattails of Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, okay? Phil Jackson has 11 rings, all right? Because of African Americans, he coached. I ain't even bring up the ones he played with in New York City in 1973, the last time the Knicks won a championship. Okay, this man has been around enough black people. He has been sensitive enough to his credit to enough black causes. This man is well-read. He's well-informed. He knows better. So when you sit up there and say it was lazy, when it comes to reading, when it comes to experiencing, when it comes to enlightening and educating yourself about what people different than you may feel, Phil Jackson is not lazy, which means that if he wasn't lazy, he intentionally said that. I am not letting him off the hook on that.
All that assumes that he wouldn't have used the word posse with a white player and his hangers-on, although in LeBron's case, they're not hangers-on. And that may be true. Difficult to prove, but I wouldn't argue against that too hard.
Okay.
That may be true.
I haven't heard him do it.
Which is why the crime here is insensitivity or laziness and... Well, go ahead.
There's one other thing. He also misrepresented the story, and Rachel Nichols enlightened us on this, in that LeBron wanted to hang out a night. The game was Wednesday in Cleveland, and then Friday they're going to Toronto, and he made it seem like LeBron just said, hold up the plane, I want to hang out with my family and my posse, when he had invited the whole team over his house for Thanksgiving rather than spending it on a random holiday.
And he also went a step further.
Misrepresenting the narrative of what LeBron was trying to do, making him look like a bad guy.
But he also went a step further, because it implied that he was a prima donna athlete who expects special treatment, when, by the way, he knows that certain guys deserve it.
Right, but that, I think, is actually a function of LeBron not playing for Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson's always done this to opponents. He tries to undermine them with statements in the press. He's always done that. In terms of the sensitivity, as I said, LeBron has an absolute right to feel that way. I think he's right about it. My own judgment is he's right about it. And he used it as a teaching moment. Right. And I started by saying that was a good thing.
Phil Jackson, right now, needs to come out and apologize to LeBron James. The NBA is better because of LeBron James. LeBron James has honored the NBA brand just as much, if not more, than Phil has. He should come out, man up, and apologize to LeBron James right now.
Whether or not LeBron wants one, by the way.
Right.
On that note, can you guys head over to Twitter, weigh in here. Should Phil Jackson publicly apologize to LeBron and company? We'll share those results a little later in the show. We want to hear your thoughts on that. But coming up next,